Hey, it's Min Lu from the Art of Verbal War, where people learn to excel in verbal skills. Today's video is about Seattle Seahawks cornerback and former Stanford University football player, Richard Sherman. Even though Richard Sherman went to my rival university, Stanford University, I will say I respect his football skills, and more importantly, I respect his verbal skills. As someone who has to deal with a very provocative sports media, always trying to provoke him to say controversial things, and opponents always trying to trash talk him, he's always got clever words that put him in control of any situation. In particular, Sherman is a master of what I call frame control. Whether he's being asked questions about his abilities as a football player or maybe about his team's chemistry, he's a master of controlling the frame of every verbal interaction. So without further ado, let me show you some examples of him exercising his excellent frame control, and then we'll talk a bit about how he does that in each situation.
A member of the media. As for his response to the Chargers receiver Keenan, who said after the game that Sherman really is not a shutdown corner, here you go.
I thought that was pretty hilarious. I thought that was it. You know, when a guy wants to get his name in the paper, he has to say something crazy. It's really funny, you know, especially when you got little guys like the Chargers guys talking about they exposed something. They had 60 and 50 yards, you know. I mean, that's probably something he'll tell his kids about. Remember that one game? I caught a few passes on Richard Sherman. Didn't score, but caught a few.
In this example, Sherman uses two of over 20 devastating verbal techniques I teach in my course Verbal Domination to counter Keenan Allen's declaration that Sherman is not a shutdown corner. The first technique he uses is what I call the future projection technique. And the second technique he uses is giving Keenan Allen an unflattering frame. Instead of addressing whether he's really a shutdown corner, Sherman instead frames Keenan Allen as someone who's hungry for publicity. And then Sherman goes on to use a devastating future projection that makes Allen appear stupid for talking about Sherman. You can learn more about how to use the future projection technique in my course, Verbal Domination. Now let's go on to the next example.
Does talk make you the best corner in the league, though? You've said that.
I mean, I don't really answer preschool questions, so you improve your line of questioning, and then we'll talk.
In this example, Sherman doesn't answer the question he's given at all. Instead, just like Keenan Allen, he gives the journalist asking the question an unflattering frame. In this case, the unflattering frame is the journalist being like a preschooler. Now let's see another example of frame control by Richard Sherman, and this one is even better.
When you live in a new landscape of media, great reporters and great journalists have a hard time making a living because they can create great stories about guys, their backgrounds, about a competitive team that goes at it every day, Pete's philosophy, et cetera, but it wouldn't get a lot of clicks.
In this example, Sherman again creates an unflattering frame for the journalist, who just asked him a provocative question about his team's team chemistry. But what's interesting here is that he doesn't state the unflattering frame about the journalist directly. Instead, this is more of what I call indirect framing, where he's basically saying the same thing as in the previous example, that the journalist isn't a serious one, but instead of directly saying that, he implies it by talking about other journalists being great. It's a very interesting and effective technique. This is really key. Sometimes it's even more effective to paint someone not by what they are, but by what they are not. Instead of saying this journalist is a preschool journalist, it's more effective here to say that he's not a great or serious journalist. Does that make sense? So let's recap. When confronted with tough questions, especially about yourself, one of the most powerful ways you can respond is to ignore the question and not respond directly to it. Instead, you respond by creating a frame or story for the other person who's trash talking you or asking you tough or provocative questions. Your goal is to make the conversation about the other person and not about yourself, just like how Richard Sherman appears to do all the time. So when he's accused of not being a shutdown corner, it's the other guy being crazy and trying to make a name for himself. When his team gets accused of having a contentious locker room, the person who's asking the question is a lightweight journalist. Or it's merely about the question itself. When he's asked a question about whether he's the best corner in the league, it's that the question itself isn't good enough to answer, that it's a preschool question. Okay, I hope you learned some very useful things about frame control. However, there's a lot more to learn about frame control. If you want to learn more about it, or if you just want to become more verbally dominant, like Richard Sherman, check out a free preview of my course Verbal Domination, The Weapons of Verbal Combat at www artofverbalwar.com/verbal domination, or click on a link in the description below or in the right hand corner of this video. Until next time, I'm Min Lu from the Art of Verbal War. Keep being excellent, my friends, and hey, please give this video a like.